Should I rush back? I'll see what I can do. All of a sudden.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Or Robin. Robin's like turn the microphone on. I'm going to turn the light on. We've been doing we'll be beginning momentarily. So it's been perfect all afternoon. Yes. Yeah. What's that part? We're ready.
No fun getting old. Good evening, everyone. My name is Carol Satt. I'm Vice President of Events for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Bonsoir à tous. Mon nom est Carol Satt. Je suis vice-présidente d'événements pour la Société canadienne royale, la Société géographique royale du Canada. Je m'excuse. Welcome to Canada's Centre for Geography and Exploration at 50 Sussex, located on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples. Bienvenue au Centre de la géographie et de l'exploration au 50 Promenade Sussex, situé sur le territoire non cédé des peuples Anishinaabe et Algonquins. We're honored to have you join us at the Royal Canadian Geographical Society's headquarters in our Alex Trebek Theatre for tonight's Geo presentation. Nous sommes honorés de vous compter parmi nous, ici au bureau de la Société géographique royale du Canada, dans notre salle de théâtre Alex Trebek pour la présentation de ce soir. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite to the stage a special guest to speak on behalf of One Ocean Expeditions, the national sponsor for this Geo Talk. Please join me in welcoming One Ocean Managing Director, RCGS Fellow and Medalist, Andrew Crossan, to say a few words.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out on this cold winter night. Again, I'm Andrew Crossan with One Ocean Expeditions, and we're proud sponsors of this event. Of course, we're also proud operators of the newly named RCGS resident. She's living up to her name. Just to give you a quick update, she's just fulfilling the first voyages in Antarctica. We've been carrying on science, and we've taken a number of school groups already to Antarctica, all proudly under the banner of the Royal Canadian Geographical Ship Resident. We're grateful for you all coming out here tonight. I understand you had some choice of intriguing entertainment today and tonight here in the city of Ottawa. I'll let you know what I think about it here. I've got some notes now. I'll stay away from that. But again, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I've made my living going to the least populated place on planet Earth for the last 25 years. And we've survived 25 years just fine, I suppose. But it's an intriguing subject. And again, thank you all very much for coming out. I won't take up any more time, but we're very proud to be sponsoring and helping these things happen here and all across the country with the RCGS. So again, thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, Andrew, for being here and for the wonderful partnership that makes not only tonight's Geo Talks event possible, but also helps advance the Society's educational mandate. My name is John Geiger, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and Canadian Geographic. And tonight we are pleased to have with us Daryl Bricker, one of the stimulating minds behind Empty Planet, the shock of global population decline. Daryl is the CEO of the world's leading social and opinion research firm, Ipsos Public Affairs, and a co-author of 2 books with John Ibbotson, writer-at-large for Globe and Mail. Both masters in their own right. Their first collaboration was met with resounding success in 2015 when their book, The Big Shift, became a #1 national bestseller. And there's no doubt that Empty Planet, which is edging up the bestseller list as we speak, will soon follow suit in the #1 position, Daryl. Of course, we're aware that John has been, his attention has been diverted by some events that are going on in the city this evening. We may get a chance to see him, but we've got a wonderful speaker in Daryl to carry the torch for us. Population decline is not a new trend. It's a recurrence throughout history, often a result of significant environmental events, famine, or disaster. But what makes the topic so fascinating today, and it is explored so beautifully in Empty Planet, is the understanding that population decline is not an individual problem, it's a global issue. It's not one country, it's the world that's going to be impacted. Developed countries like Canada and developing countries alike are now sharing this population decline impact. As Daryl and John write in their book, all the years we've been together on Earth, we have never faced such a thing. It is a good thing in terms of the environment, something that will give a planet heavily stressed by human activity a much needed break potentially, but is also a threat to the global economy and other issues. So we have an expert here to talk about that. Is it one or is it the other? Is it both? So please join me in welcoming to the stage for tonight's Geo Talk, Empty Planet author Daryl Bricker.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. And I want to start off by thanking Canadian Geographic because they've been supporters of the book right since I think the first time they heard that we were putting this together, and they put it in there's an article, I think it was this month or last month, about the book, and they've sponsored to talk about this in Toronto and again tonight. So we, both John and I very much appreciate it. Now apparently there's a 5-alarm dumpster fire happening down the street, which has taken up, unfortunately, the time and talent of my co-author, John Ibbotson, who keeps sending Grant, his partner, and I emails about, can you believe this? Can you believe this? During my daytime activity, my colleague, Mike College is here somewhere, who runs Canadian Public Affairs business, and Greg Jack, who works with us in public affairs. We spend a lot of our time talking about politics and looking at public opinion and doing polling on political issues. So I have some thoughts about it. As I continue to get more information about what's happening down the street, I might be able to share that with you. But I know that you're here tonight not necessarily to talk about Canadian politics, but to talk about this book. And both John and I felt when we wrote this that this was the most compelling material that we've ever worked on. We couldn't wait to talk to each other about it. We could not wait to visit another country, to explore the various aspects of what was happening, what we talked about in this book, Anti-Planet, what was happening on the ground in those various places. And the reason for it was John and I both had a very clear view from the start of this, that we had a really good counterintuitive position based in data, which I'll go through in just a minute, that told a really interesting story about how the human species was evolving, and almost nobody was talking about it. And the thing that we also understood was that this could be a very dry statistical book that, as other people who've written on this topic have gone down that direction and made a very statistical kind of analysis that would eliminate everyday people, even everyday smart people, from the conversation. We felt that this was something that we had to make available to people to start another conversation. So it's a very accessibly written book. In fact, there are no tables and charts in the book. John insisted on that. I, on the other hand, kind of like charts. John didn't know any of those in there, but I think he was right. I'll let you judge whether or not he was. But the other thing that we talked about was that this had to be a reported book. It just wasn't going to be two guys sitting in their studies, in one in Ottawa, one in Toronto, writing about what they found in articles that they read in the newspaper or statistical analyses that they found from various institutions. That what we would do is we would actually go out in the world and we would visit the places that we wanted to talk to see what the stories were on the ground. So we could get a real sense of how this was happening in the lives of individual people. And one of the interesting things that came out of the book was that everybody arrives in a similar place, but they do it in different ways and for different reasons. So that's why, even though each chapter talks about population decline, the real interesting part is how the country and the culture of that country, because this is a book about culture, how that culture, that unique culture in each country, has created this situation. And so that's what we really wanted to do. So from the outset, our view was we had a compelling idea that we were both really excited about. The next thing was that we wanted to share it with as wide an audience as possible. We just didn't want us going into some academic journal. We wanted it to be an accessible book, and we also wanted to tell the stories of people. We wanted to go around the world and report on what was happening on the ground and why this phenomenon was occurring. Now, what's the compelling story, compelling piece of information? For us, it's what we call vertical knowledge. Everybody knows about vertical knowledge. It's that thing that we all know is true. All the politicians know it's true. All the academics know it's true. All the journalists know it's true. All of you know it's true. But it's not true. And that is that the world's population, according to the UN, is going to be, by 2100, about 11.2 billion people. No, it will not. And the reason it will not be is because our culture is affecting the way that we think about our families and the number of children that we want to have in our lives. And it really is a story about fertility. In Canada, the birth rate today is 1.6. So that's the average Canadian woman in her lifetime has 1.6 kids. To have a replacing population, that is just replacing the people who are leaving the population as people leave the population, you need a birth rate of at least 2.1. One for yourself, one for your partner, and a little bit extra for those who can't or won't. We're half a kid short in Canada. And that's a very common story through the developing world. Why does that happen? One single word: urbanization. When you leave the country and you move to the city, children change. The role of children in their life changes. In the country, they're labor. They're an extra set of hands on the farm. Having a lot of them, particularly in the past when not all of them would survive to the level that they survive now, having a lot of them was good insurance. Having a lot of them was also good because there wasn't national security programs that would take care of people in their older age or provide that type of social network that everybody needs in order to get by in life. So having a lot of kids was a really good idea. When you move to the city, it changes. Now children move from being labor and an asset into being more of an expense. They're mouths to feed. And when you live in a city, there is a lot of economic pressure for you to reduce the number of children that you have in your family. Canada, over the space of the last century, has become an incredibly urbanized country. I know we call ourselves the Great White North. It is baloney. None of us live in the Great White North, and fewer of us live in the Great White North every day. Almost 82% of us now live in a city, or actually a metropolitan area of 1,000 people or more. 40% of us live in just 4 places. We've gone through massive urbanization in Canada over the space of the last century. In fact, we completely flipped the distribution from rural to urban over the space of the last century. There are many places in the world now that this is happening during the course of a generation. For example, Brazil has gone from 80% rural, 20% urban in 1960 to exactly the opposite today, in one generation, basically, 1960. So the effect on why you would want to have kids is that in the countries I said before, labor in the city more of an expense. The other thing that changes along with urbanization is the lives of women. And if anything, the story of the book is about the empowerment of women. It's really a story about women. Because ultimately, they decide how many children they want to have. And when a woman moves from the country to the city, a lot of things happen. The first thing that happens is that she gets access to education. The single biggest reproductive policy that you could have in the world is the education of women. It has a huge impact on the number of children that they have. It always goes down. And you don't just have to look at women in other places, you can look at women in Canada. So what's happened to women in Canada? Well, back in 1960, the average Canadian woman got married when she was around 20, had her first child when she was around 21, 22, and she had an average of 4 kids. Today, the average Canadian woman gets married, if at all, around the age of 30. She has her first kid when she's not much older than that, probably around 31, 32, and she has 2. Actually, she has 1.6. And then maybe they buy a dog. You don't have to listen to me on this. Look at your own families. Take a look at how many kids your grandparents had. Take a look at how many kids your parents had. How many aunts and uncles you have. Take a look at your own family if you've got kids. How many do you expect that they're going to have? And I bet you almost every generation it's smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. That's what's happening as a result of women making different decisions about their lives. And they do it because of education. They do it because they join the workforce. In Canada, we'll keep coming back to Canada. In Canada, female participation and male participation in labor and workforce today is almost exactly the same. In fact, the group that's actually declining in terms of workforce participation is men, not women. Get an education, get a job. All of that takes time and takes probably the first 10 years out of the time when you used to be looking at having kids. That's not just happening here, that's happening all over the world. The next thing that happens is that you get exposure to other women. You can learn. You can learn about different family models. You can look at how other people are living their lives. Something else happens and changes when you come into contact with more women outside of just your little village. The next thing that happens is religion becomes less important in your life. If you want to find a place that has high birth rates these days, find a place that's poor, in which women are not emancipated, in which it has a high degree of religious participation. In places that are like that, you have high birth rates. Every other place, you have lower birth rates in decline. So when you bring all of those things together and you change the lives of women, you create a situation in which all of the incentives are to have fewer kids. And so that's what they're doing. So you say to yourself, okay, I know that's happening in places like Western Europe. I mean, that's not a unique tale that I'm telling you. I mean, people generally know that Many countries are in situations. In fact, it's almost 30 countries now in the world that are actually losing population every year. Or actually, have declining populations. In fact, in Japan, they lost 450,000 people from the population last year. The birth rate's 1.5. But the part that's really shocking to people is when you say, well, it's not just happening in developed countries, it's happening in developing countries too. Surely the heavens are having tons and tons of kids in India and China, and all over the Pacific and all through Africa. And the answer is not as many as you think. Not as many as you think. In fact, if you take the top 10 most populous countries in the world today, 8 of them have below replacement rate birth rates. One of my favorites is Brazil. Brazil, I think, is the 5th most populous country in the world. Their birth rate in 1960 was 8. Today, it's 1.8. And Brazil is a fascinating story. Brazil is fascinating because it is really the effect of culture and public policy that's created this situation. What was the effect of culture? And you can read it in the chapter on Brazil. The effect of culture was, under the old military dictatorship in Brazil, one of the things that they decided to do was they wanted to increase the standard of living for people living in places like favelas. People who had more marginal lives in Brazil. So what they did was they spread electricity around various communities in Brazil, particularly even in places like favelas. And along with that electricity, what they made available were cheap appliances like televisions. So even in a favela, you can see it today, you can see people watching television in a favela. I went when I was in Sao Paulo. And what do they watch on? Their televisions, their new televisions. They watch these wonderful things called telenovelas, in which women have very sophisticated lives. Fewer kids, affluent, more empowered. They created role models for women in Brazil as to how their life could be. And one of the interesting things when you look at the studies that have been done on this, along with the spread of television and electricity in places like favelas, they've tracked the changing names of people, kids when they're born. Lo and behold, what happens? The stars of the telenovelas, people start naming their kids after them. So that's where they first started to see this kind of thing happening in Brazil. The public policy aspect of this related to the way their healthcare system works. Now, they do have a form of public healthcare in Brazil, not a really good one. You certainly would prefer the Canadian system to the one that exists in Brazil, but there's this perverse aspect to the way that childbirth works in Brazil. It is one of the countries that has the highest rates of cesarean sections. So why do they have so many cesarean sections? Well, they have cesarean sections because the doctors and the women who are having kids have this little conspiracy among themselves where after a certain number of cesarean sections, you're also going to have a tubal ligation. You're going to sterilize yourself. And this is one of the things that was interesting when we went around the world, particularly in developing countries. Women's desire to be able to control their fertility was so strong that actually their preferred method of birth control was sterilization, because they wanted to prevent an accident on a Saturday night. India has one of the highest rates of sterilization, as does China. So even if they wanted to turn the situation around, so many people who are of fertile ages in both of those countries have fertilized them, or have sterilized themselves. So in Brazil, the situation is one in which women conspire with doctors, because doctors get paid a little more, under the table to do these tubal ligations, to practice that type of birth control, which is one of the reasons that Brazil has one of the highest rates of cesarean sections in the world. So Brazil is an interesting case because what it shows is that people are moving toward the same outcome, but the culture is creating a different environment for different variables that cause this to happen. When I went to a slum in Delhi called I'm trying to pronounce it, Srinivasapuri, which is in southern Delhi, and spent a day walking around and talking to women, had a couple of focus groups with them. They talk just like the women in Brazil. What do they want to prevent? Accidents. What was the best way to prevent an accident? Sterilization. So women in Brazil, and actually in Brazil and India, in both slums, actually got married very early and had their first kid really early. But then in Brazil, they have this wonderful phrase that they use, the women actually say it, shut down the factory, or closing the factory. That's what they do in India too. It's a way of controlling their fertility so they can have a different kind of life. So when we were in the slum when I was in the slum in Delhi, talking to women, actually we were doing some focus groups there about why, how they saw their lives. They didn't have a lot of good things to say about their husbands. They absolutely did not have a lot of good things to say about the lives of their mothers and their grandmothers lived. And they wanted to have a different life. They still wanted to have a family because they had a responsibility to have a family, they felt. But they wanted a limited family. In fact, they have this wonderful phrase in India that the government was using as part of their birth control campaigns. It was we two, our two, the ideal family in India. So lo and behold, when I was in India and I was talking to demographers there, they said, look, the UN has got this completely wrong. They said that the birth rate here in India is at 2.4. No, the birth rate in India is at 2.1. This was 2 years ago. Just recently in November, The Lancet published a study by a whole series of world demographers saying that India's at 2.1. China's at 1.5, and that's probably too high. The Lancet has it down to about 1.4. That's 36% of the global population in two countries. If they're not having kids, who's having kids? Now, granted, it's not actually going to be an empty planet, but empty your planet didn't sound like a very good title. Or fewer planet. In fact, it's funny, I'm getting all these emails from strange places now, because this book is a global book. I mean, it was published in February 5th in Canada, the US, and the UK. And it's coming out in Spanish in June. It's being published in Chinese, Japanese, it's all over the world. So I'm getting all these strange emails from people, and one of the comments they have is, how can you say that we have an empty planet, 30 million people? It's not literal, it's a metaphor, okay? It's not literal. So if they're not having kids in China and India, and by the way, in both countries, 60 million women are missing out of their populations for the reasons that we know. And a lot of the other women that are still in their fertile years have decided that they don't want to be fertile anymore. How are they going to create all of these people that the UN says that we're going to need in order to have this population of 11.2 people, 11.2 billion people? Well, I'm a math guy, I don't see how it adds up. I don't see how it happens. But the place everybody always goes to is Africa. Oh my God, population is out of control in Africa. They are going to be the engine for this population growth up to the level of 11.2 billion people. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to look at. So I went to Africa, went to Kenya, talked to people in Kenya. Actually, and when you read the book, you'll see we went to a very interesting dinner in Kenya where I sat around with 14 or 15 African women talking about their families. And very interesting culture in Kenya. What I was not prepared for was the sorts of the things that I heard from women who were like senior executives in companies, people who were working for international corporations, and, were very well educated. They may have been to Europe to get their education. Articulate, very modern women in every way that you could conceive of them being modern, except for one thing. Their husband paid a dowry in order to marry them. Now, why do people, or a bride price, some people confused on that, although the people I spoke to in Africa call it a dowry. It's the exact opposite of what it is in India, where the woman's family pays the bride's family pays the groom's family. In Africa, the groom's family pays the bride's family. And it's usually a representation of livestock. So it's cattle or goats or sometimes honey for the wedding wine or whatever. But it's a substantial amount. And these days, if you live in Nairobi, of course, you can't store livestock, so they have a cash calculation that they work out. They even have little apps and things that they can use to calculate bride prices, because it's a serious thing. And you sit back and you think, well, why do they do that? And the reason is because you can't rely on the government. So we rely on the government, for example, for pensions, or we rely on them for healthcare. And it was an interesting example that one woman told me about in Kenya. The thing that she pointed to was that nobody dies alone. So your funeral is always arranged because we have community organizations that do that. That's what we do. So this idea of almost like the TOEFL, these voluntary organizations coming together and doing everything for people in Kenya, because you couldn't trust the government that that's what you did. And the way that you worked your social security, the way that you created your social worth, your network in your world was through marriage. So everybody had to be able to demonstrate that they were either going to attract a bride or a groom that was going to add to the family's social security. So it was funny, I said, well, walk me through, how does this work? Because I know I'm a guy from the West, I'm from Canada, I don't really understand how this works. Explain it to me. She said, well, every family has a parlor in their house. And when you go in the parlor and you take a look, there's always pictures of the kids at their graduation, what school they went to in the parlor, because that's where you kind of bring in the prospective mates, always arranged by the aunties, by the way. Nobody's swiping left or right. Always arranged within the community. And you bring them in to sort of say, my child has value. I mean, there should be worth whatever. You should be prepared to, pony up this amount in order to be able to become a member of our family. And it was interesting, she said, not just her, but around this entire table, they said, well, that's why you have to stay in school so long. You have to get a good education, you have to get a good job, particularly, for example, in a Western company, because you have to be able to add to the family's net worth, your social network. So that means that, we have to stay in school for a while. Sounds a little bit like Canadian living too, right? Get an education, get a job. Okay, well that takes you up to your late 20s and your early 30s. That's what's happening in Kenya, along with education. So, for example, in education in Kenya these days, boys and girls are as likely to be attending school. In fact, girls do a little bit better than boys do. And this is increasing to the level where they're making, for example, post-secondary education universal in Kenya. So you look at Kenya and you say, okay, well, what is the effect of that? Well, the effect of that is in 1980, the average woman in Kenya had 6 kids. Today she has 3.4, and it's falling like a stone. So as you go through the book, or we go through the book, and we travel around the world, we see all of these different circumstances in which people are living their lives through their cultures, creating their families, but all coming to the same sort of conclusion, that the outcome of this is that we're going to have fewer children. Now, there are places in Africa where this is not happening as rapidly. For example, Nigeria, I think its birth rate is around 5, but 10 years ago it was 6. So maybe it's a little slower, but then again, Nigeria is one of the most rapidly urbanizing countries in the world. So you ask yourself, is what's happening in India right now going to happen in Nigeria? Yeah, I think it is. And the funny thing is, we talked to the UN about this, and we interviewed the guy who's in charge of the modeling that gets us to 11.2 million people at the UN, and he said, look, Africa, we just absolutely know that this is going to happen. We're very sure of it. It's a very interesting idea you guys have. It's never 11.2, we're very sure of this. And then I said, so how good is the data that you guys have on Nigeria? So why are you banking so much on this thing happening in Nigeria where you can't even effectively count it yourself? And in fact, the Lancet just came out, as I said before, this new study that was done, and it has the Nigerian birth rate 0.3 lower than the UN has it. So you sit back and you say, yeah, I think this is kind of universal. It's kind of happening everywhere. So what does this add up to? These are the forces that are driving this, and it's mostly cultural, and it's happening everywhere. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well, one of the things that I remember saying to John when we started writing this book is one of my inspirations when I think about topics is like documentaries on television. I watch them. National Geographic documentary. But David Attenborough, and it's always the same thing at the end of every documentary. And the draft will not be able to live into the future because man continues to encroach upon his habitat, and it's all being destroyed, and everything's happening. And I'm thinking, what happens if there's fewer people? And what happens if all those people are living in cities? Maybe the giraffe might have a little bit better chance than they've had in the past. Maybe other animals are going to have a bit better chance than they've had in the past because we've made the decision that we're not going to be living. We're not going to be living all over the world in the way that we used to, and we're going to be living in these places that are increasingly larger cities. That's basically what's going to happen, and that's good for the environment. I mean, we're going to have to figure out how to run these cities, but we're going to be giving the giraffes a chance, as I said before. The other thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving the climate a chance too. Because if you want countries that are, really have issues with carbon, they're countries that are disproportionately have higher levels of rural activity. When you put people in cities, it tends to be more efficient for the climate. I mean, for example, as you say in the book, New York State is one of the most climate-friendly states in the entire United States, mainly because of New York City. Why? Subways, people living in high-rises with radiant heat, less driving because it's so damn hard to get around in downtown New York City. It's actually probably pretty good for the world. It's good for the oceans. It's good for just about everything that you can think of, having a more controlled human population. But what is it not so good for, and what's going to be challenging for? It's going to be challenging for our economy. If you have an economy in which it's driven by youth, and particularly youth consumption, there's going to be a lot less youth. There's going to be a lot more older people. So one of the things I like to talk about, and I actually just gave this presentation yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before? The Canadian Restaurant Association. Let's talk about food for a second. We're obsessed with young people in Canada. I mean, the millennials are defining everything. First of all, there's not as many of them as you think, because we're not having kids. And the other thing that we may not realize is a lot of those millennials are over the age of 40 now. So that group that we think is all this youthful, energy and the rest of it, it's smaller than you think. It's certainly smaller than previous generations in terms of proportions. The average Canadian back in 1920 lived to the age of 57. I celebrated my 58th birthday on Saturday. I'm a very old man by 1920 standards. Today, the average Canadian lives to the age of 82, and we continue to expand in terms of longevity on the face of the earth. And it's everywhere. China, back in 1950, the average Chinese person lived to the age of 42. Today, they live to the age of 80. We've doubled human life in China in less than a century. So a lot more people. The median age in Canada today is 41. Half the population is over half the population. So it's getting older out there. And so what I said to the restaurant guys is because you always get somebody up there saying, "I want to take a selfie with my food." And it's all about apps, and it's all about people delivering things to kids playing video games and all the rest of it. And this person got up and gave a presentation and said, I was visiting this person's house the other day, and these two kids were up in the loft playing video games, and Dad was downstairs, and the doorbell rang. One of the kids ran downstairs and got some food that somebody delivered at the house and ran back upstairs. 5 minutes later, somebody else, was ringing the doorbell, and the other kid came down and got some food and ran back upstairs. And they said, "Wow, that's the future of the restaurant industry." And I said, "No, it isn't. Why wasn't Dad using the app?" Because Dad's got all the money. And there aren't that many kids. What are we doing for technology for older people? The fastest growing segment in the Canadian population today, is people 80 years of age and older. That's the fastest growing segment in the Canadian population. I'm telling you this. This is the first time you've heard this. Nobody talking about it. Except Statistics Canada. Nobody really listens. But it's just incredible. So I said to them, well, what are you making for people who are older? Because another person got up and said, people stop going to restaurants around the age of 33, or they start gearing down what it is that the number of times that they go to restaurants. And I said, perhaps that's because you don't make a restaurant for people over the age of 33. Maybe you should turn down the music a little bit so people can actually have a conversation. Maybe you should turn the lights up a little bit so maybe people can actually see what they're eating. Maybe you should respect the fact that people, as they get older, might have more complicated diets. Maybe you should put some things on the menu for them. Not everything has to be deep fried and with ghost peppers on it. Maybe you should make the boots possible for somebody to get in and out. Maybe you should make it possible for somebody who has mobility issues to park their scooter or park their walker somewhere in your restaurant, because right now there's no place for them to put it. Maybe you should do that. And they're looking at me like you guys are looking at me now. And it's like, yeah, that's the future. That's the future. And guess what? As I said before, all these people have all the money. They own all the real estate. They have all the investments. They don't have big student debts they're paying off for themselves. They have all the money. What are you making for them? And the answer was nothing. It was funny, I walked out of the room and I was standing outside and I had a guy come up to me and he said, you know, I've seen you give a presentation like this before. I said, well, what do you do? He says, I'm in this restaurant called Salisbury's. Does anybody know Salisbury's in Winnipeg? That's a chain. He said, we basically serve older people. Our business is off the hook. We can't keep up with it. We have 13 locations. We just built a new place. And you know, based on your presentation the last time I heard you talk about this, I put a space in the front of my restaurant so people put their lockers in the street. I said, well, maybe somebody's listening. Maybe somebody's listening. So, we're not having any kids and everybody's getting older and the global population is shrinking. What kind of an economy are we going to have? We don't answer that question in the book, but we think we need to be prepared for an economy in which the type of consumption that's driven by youth, as we've seen, particularly since the end of the Second World War, isn't going to be the driver of the economy in the future. We're going to have to start thinking about how we're going to separate some of those older folks from some of the money they have. It's not that they don't want to spend it, it's that people really don't build. I'll give you one more example and I'll conclude. It's one of my favorites because a friend of mine's in the music promotion business. And I was talking to him about how people make money in music now, because nobody buys records anymore. Right? Nobody buys CDs anymore. They stream, older people actually buy CDs. And the only people who can actually make any money touring these days are what they call legacy artists. So if you want to go see Rod Stewart, yeah, or if you want to go see the Eagles, yeah, those guys can sell out a stadium. In fact, there's been practically nobody who can sell out a stadium that's become important in music since the turn of the century. I did a little thing, another thing that I'm writing, which I went to the top 30 grossing tours over the space of the last couple of years. And there was 2 acts that actually created their first music after the year 2010. Only 2 of 30. So I said, well, how do people make money in the music business these days? I said, well, the most successful musical festival in the world is called Coachella. Held just outside of Los Angeles, just like Woodstock. You get together with all your buddies, you go up in a van, you camp, and rain or shine, and watch like 1,000 different bands. It's great for the bands because they can all go play and they can expand their audience. They can get noticed a lot better than going up and going to playing in the Bible Market and all the other places like that all over the country. Much easier to go to Coachella than you can be on a side stage and get noticed by a lot of people. So good for the music business, good for the bands. Average ticket's about $800 for 3 days. Was the most profitable, highest revenue music festival in history. Until they ran one the next year in the same location called Desert Trip. Numbered seats, good food, air conditioning, restaurants or restrooms that worked. Average age of the acts, 72. Average age of the attendees, 55. Price of the ticket, $1,800 or $1,500. The biggest selling music festival of all time, most profitable music festival of all time. Why? Because it made it for older people. It's not that they don't want to go. It's that you don't make it possible for them to go. How many of you are going to go stand out in the field for 3 days? Other than to do some field studies for Canadian Geographic. Probably no one. So I think that there is opportunity in the economy, but it's not if we keep thinking about it the way that we used to think about it. You have to open up your mind a little bit to what the opportunities are, and you have to follow them up. So if you have a declining population and you want to stop the decline of your population, what can you do? If you think it's a bad thing. Because in some countries, it's actually declining quite precipitously. Japan has some 450,000 people. The average age of a Japanese person, the median age is 47. They are going to literally decline in a precipitous fashion over the space of the next period of time, and there's no end in sight. So if you think that that's a problem, and there's some places that don't. Hungary, for example, is going through what it's going through right now, very anti-immigrant, trying to incentivize I think the thing was I saw the other day that if a woman had 3 kids, she would be allowed, she would be exempt from paying taxes for the rest of her life. It's one of the things that they're trying to do in Hungary because they have a declining population. So one of the ways you can deal with it is through immigration. Short to medium term solution. Why? Because all the places that we're getting immigrants from, they have fewer and fewer people too. Also, those countries, mostly Pacific nations, are becoming more middle class. There's less incentive for them to leave. So there's a short window of opportunity for us to be able to pick up some of the bigger, best brains, some of the resources, and have them go to various countries through some form of immigration. But immigration has become an extremely contentious issue. I could give you another whole presentation on populism, the sources of populism. Everybody talks about, the fourth industrial revolution and how that's creating populism. That is baloney. The biggest variable driving populism in the world today is cultural change, mostly as a result of immigration and people's rejection of it. But if a country can figure out how to bring in some immigrants, they can slow down the aging of the population. Canada is exemplary on that point. And the reason for it is because we have a very interesting approach to immigration. We tell a story in the book where John was interviewed by a Swedish journalist, and they just couldn't talk. We're talking about immigration, they couldn't really come together on it. They didn't really understand what each other was talking about until the Swedish journalist said, we're talking about refugees and humanitarian issues. And John said, no, we're talking about recruiting. We have a whole different approach to it in Canada. We try to pick people who are going to be successful in this country and bring them in. And they have been successful. They've been incredibly successful. Canada has the fastest growing population in the G8 as a result of it. Because almost all of our population increase these days is as a result of people not leaving this modal co-op and new people come to this country. We're not having enough kids, whether it's 1.6. So if a country can figure out how to make that work, they can stave this off for a period of time. It's going to be an advantage. The United States has always been incredibly successful with this, but with the current president, they're going to be less successful at it, probably. And it's going to be a problem for them. It's going to be a problem for them. But for many other countries too, because the French can have difficulty with it. Brexit, that's being driven largely by people's attitudes towards cultural change and immigration, not economics. Just about all the countries that you can look at in Western Europe are struggling with this. Canada, fairly exemplary on this point, and we have a bit of an advantage as a result of it. So immigration is one solution. Another solution is that you can change the way that we incentivize families to have kids, or we create an environment in which they can have kids. So, finally, someday, maybe men will do at least half the work in this, because we know based on survey research that do not anywhere in the world, even in the Nordic countries. So maybe someday that will occur. Maybe paternity leave will become something that's more taken up by fathers. Maybe more of the burden will be shared. Maybe they will create better incentives in terms of childcare, in terms of social policies to make it more possible for people to have kids. But even if you do, you have to have 3. 2 is not enough. So how many women do you know who want to have 3 kids? Because once you have the social norm is to have 1 or 2, that's the low fertility child. that's where you get stuck. That's what's happened in China. That's what's happened in China. The family norm is now one. In fact, the lowest fertility of any immigrant group in Canada is Chinese women. They've imported the one-child policy in Canada. It's fascinating. Culture. Right? Culture has a big effect on this. So those incentive programs are all great, but they really haven't worked anywhere, and they certainly haven't put any country, particularly any major country, over the 2.1 threshold. I mean, even in the province of Quebec, as much as they spend on childcare, you would think that they would have a different fertility rate. Now it's about 1.7. It's just a little above the community average. And the problem, of course, with these types of programs is that they're usually the first thing to go when we're going into a recession. First thing that people go after. So unless you have some reliability around this, that incentive structure is really not going to work. So you can try it, and we should always try and make it easier for people to have kids because we want them to have kids. It's good for our country, but it hasn't really created a difference. So you've got those two choices: immigration or making that kind of change. In terms of social policy, the other thing that you could do is older women decide if they want to have more kids. Whenever I hear anybody say, and I get letters about this, I'm getting emails about this now, about, if we just invested in more technology to make it easier for older people to have kids, and I'm thinking, how many 60-year-old women do you know want to have a kid? Maybe there are some. Thank you if you decide to do that. But extremely expensive in a fairly marginal way to turn around the fact that there's probably going to be between 500 and 700 million people leaving the Chinese population over the space of this century. I mean, think about that. How much you have to account for in order to fill that hole. And that's just to stay the same. So I'll wrap this up. That's what the book's about. It does a much better job of describing it than I just did. But that's what the book is about. And I just want to leave you with this thought. John and I, when we wrote the book, we didn't put a value judgment on it. We didn't say that declining population was a good thing. We didn't say that it was a bad thing. But we said it was an important thing. And then we needed to understand it because it was going to be one of the single most important issues that we are going to face through the course of this century. Thank you very much. Oh, that's better. Because all I could see was red light. So I thought it was the parliamentary committee.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Two quick questions. What about declining sperm counts in men around the world as a contributing factor to couple that with culture? And the second one is, The Guardian said last week that next century is going to be the century from hell. And I'd like you just, if you could just comment on that with declining populations, if in fact that could be true. Thank you.
Okay, century from hell, I don't know who said that, but I'm still optimistic. On the declining sperm counts, yes, I read some articles about that, but I didn't quite know how to, whether that was settled science. I'd seen some scientific articles about that, but it seemed to be still up for debate or still a question. So we didn't really deal with it, and all it would do is just basically add to the argument that we're already making, which is that the population is never going to get to 11.2 billion. We're going to reach probably somewhere around between 8 and 9 billion mid-century. It's going to decline probably to around where it is today. The difference will be that everybody will be much more urbanized, and the population will be a lot older. So I guess if that looks like hell, then that's hell.
You started off by saying that the United Nations has it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on why you think it is that the United Nations? Why do they have it wrong? Where are they getting their numbers from? Yeah.
Well, I'm a statistician. That's what I do. So I always find it interesting to go and look at what other statisticians do in other places. Now, I work in a particular area that is the most masochistic of statistics, and that's political polling. It can really beat the life out of you. My hair used to be black. before I started into this business. And one thing I know is that modeling, whether it's in political polling or any other type of endeavor, is really, really dependent on the models themselves. So to really understand what's going on and why they would come up to that conclusion, you have to go look at how they do the model. And so we interviewed the guy, and I went through all the methodology reports on how they do the modeling. It's really simple. It's not boring, I promise. There's just 3 variables in the model. They are mortality, so the number of people dying, fertility, the number of people being born, and mobility, the number of people moving around. The model projects forward for 100 years, but is all based on what has happened. So all they have are the statistics that they currently have based on the information that they have from various countries around the world, which is one of the reasons that this Lancet piece of research got done by this other 50 or 60 demographers funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because they were having the same problem with the United Nations model. And I'll talk about the Lancet study in just a second, but where I had the trouble was that I knew that there were all sorts of things that were happening in the cultural aspects of this that were not included in the model. The modelers there said that they were baked in. So things like, for example, female education. Well, yes, it's baked in for now, but what if it increases? So I interviewed a guy, a professor in Vienna, at the University of Vienna, named Wolfgang Lorentz, which is the first person I saw who had actually done some additional modeling based on UN data, but added in one more variable, which was incidence of female education. So what happens to the population? What happens to the population estimates if you just include a relatively modest increase in female education across the world over the course of the century? Lo and behold, the numbers drop down to between 8 and 9 billion. So I thought, okay, well, that's really interesting. I know education is really important to us, and they don't include it. And then the next thing I looked at was urbanization, because they also have an urbanization model. And I noticed in the last year that the UN had said that by 2050, world urbanization was going to move from 66 to 68, so it was going to increase by 3%. And I know that one of the biggest effects on fertility is urbanization. That isn't included in the model. So you sit back and say, how many other things did they not include in this model that they should include in it? And it turns out that there's a fair number. So the reason that I have trouble with the model is because I believe that they have not adequately represented what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in the world. It's too dependent on what happened before and not forward enough looking to really capture what is likely to happen this year. Now, I'll tell you how that comes back into my world of modeling. Every pollster who ever screws up, it always usually comes down to the same thing. By screwing up, I mean getting an election, hey, I did the US election. Then why do we screw up? Because we think that everything that worked in the past is going to work again. And it doesn't. The world's changing, things are changing, there's more information that's available. The patterns of the past are not the patterns of the future. Yes, you can get some clues, but there are other things that you need to take into account. And I think that the UN is not taking that seriously enough. And I said that to him, he disagreed with me, he's entitled to his opinion. But my view is that that's a problem. The second thing is that the big difference, it's interesting in the UN's model, you can tell I'm a math guy, that's a lot of stuff, is that the UN actually doesn't put out one model, it puts out 3. It puts out what they call their high variant, the median variant, and their low variant. Their high variant is so the median variant is the one that they accept, that's the one that's 11.2 billion. They have a certain birth rate that's calculated for that, fertility rate that's calculated for that. If you increase it by 0.5, so half a kid, the world's population gets to like 13 billion. Not 11.2 billion, it gets like 13, 14 billion. But if you reduce it by half a kid, it gets to 7 in 21. So just reducing it by half a kid. So when I started looking at what they had for fertility rates, Some of them you just scratch your head on. And this is, I'm sure, why the guys published this article in the Lancet. Well, what they have for Nigeria, I think, was 5.6. The UN had 5.6. The Lancet had it at 5.3. UN has India at 2.3 right now, or 2.4. The Lancet had it at 2.1. China and the UN had it at 1.5. The Lancet had it at 1.4. So you go through all of these countries and you realize that almost every single one of the guys in the Lancet, these other demographers, have a low fertility rate. Okay, is it approaching half a kid shorter? Kind of looks that way, actually. It's already happened. I mean, if India is 2.1 and not 2.3, well, there's 0.2 of a big number. So my view is that there's tons and tons and tons of evidence. When you go and look at other demographic analysis, and you look at how this model was constructed to say that there's a very reasonable position that somebody can take, that it is going to be smaller than what the UN is projecting, and more demographers every day are actually saying that. John and I just happened to write it down in the book that people can read. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
It seems like most countries have figured out how to reduce fertility rates. Did you find any countries in your research that have found any innovative ways to increase fertility rates?
No. No one. They've all tried. I mean, we have some great stories in the book. I keep looking at Grant because I know he's in his book as much as I know this week. Yeah, he's been around for a while. So, for example, they have like a special date night now in Singapore that's sponsored by the state. What's the birth rate in Singapore? 1.2. Hasn't done anything. They've got special advertising programs in South Korea now trying to get people to get together. Yeah, hasn't had any effect. I think that there has been some progress made. It's basically made on the basis of reducing child mortality. So more kids are living, but it's not nearly enough to replace the ones that are being born at all. So no, it hasn't worked anywhere. Nobody's figured it out. And as long as we don't change the pattern and the way that we make kids, I mean, I have actually had people write me notes about pod solutions, invasion of body snatchers. I don't think that's particularly realistic. Of course, I get all the Handmaid's Tales references now too. I mean, that comes really well. But to this point, nobody's really figured it out if they can. And even if they did, it's not that women really want to have 5 kids anymore. That's not the life they want. There are some that do, but not enough.
Thank you. What was the spark that started this? Was it a philosophical, political discussion, or was it something you uncovered in your work?
For me, John has a different story. We remember this differently. I actually read an article, I've actually got it on my iPhone about 5 years ago, in the English language version of Der Spiegel by Wolfgang Watts, in which he basically said, I think the UN has got this all wrong. And he just included this one additional variable on female education, and I thought, that's a great story. I wonder if that's true, because I've been discovering that in my own research. I know what's happening in Canada, I know what's happening in the United States, I know what's happening in France, I know what's happening in other places. What's happening in China and India, nobody really knew. And so I started reading more and more about it. I was like, oh my God, this is happening everywhere. Why can't anybody tell the story? And the reason is because they write these dry academic kind of poems that are inaccessible to people. And nobody actually goes out and does on the ground stuff that John did. So that's really what the spark was. And John claims that he wrote his first article about the population decline back in 2001. I didn't read it. So I'm assuming this is being correct, but yeah, he said he believed he was on the same thing for a long time. And we wrote The Big Shift together, which did, whether you agree with what we said in the book or not, did really well in Canada. And we thought we had another book in this, and we thought as counterintuitive statistical arguments were our sweet spot, and we had this one, and we just wanted to see where it would go. And in some ways, and I know Grant knows this, John and I just wanted to see if we could write a Goldberg book. How does one go about doing it? I mean, I remember the first time I wrote a book. I wrote my first book actually with that Greenspot back in 2001. It was called Searching for Certainty. And the reason I wrote that book was I wanted to figure out how you do it. what is the process? I mean, I go walk into a bookstore, how do these books get in this place? How does somebody get a book deal? How do you get a publisher interested? What makes for a good book proposal? How does this process work? So back in 2000, when I was doing Eddie Greenspan, that was how do you do it in Canada? And this one for both John and I was a voyage of discovery. How do you publish a global book? And we didn't know. I mean, all our books have been Canadian. John's published in close to 20 now. They've all been Canadian. Some of them done better than others. Some of them actually been fiction. John's a very gifted writer in many genres. And you know, I thought the big shift after we'd been #1 in Canada, why don't you see if you can take it on a bigger stage? So that's what we tried to do. And we had and it was a complicated process. It was a complicated process because you don't just go and sign one contract. You have to sign contracts in every country. You have to convince publishers everywhere. And you sit down with those New York publishers, they've seen it all before. And you better have a pretty good story. And we did, thankfully. So I think that the spark was a combination of feeling that we had a really good idea, feeling that the next stage of development for both of us as writers was to take it onto a bigger stage, and just really both being fascinated by this process of not only this really discovering what was behind these things that we were looking at, but just figuring out what the process was of taking a big idea like this to the world. So that's what got us doing. So, oh, sorry, somebody's got a microphone.
Hi, sorry, yeah, I didn't.
They've got the conch. Okay, go ahead.
You talked a lot about the fertility side of the equation together, but the story is the mortality side of the equation. And if you believe some people, you're going to live till 100 or whatever. But other data suggests that mortality or life expectancy is decreasing, particularly for certain demographics like men in the US, for example.
Right.
You addressed that in the book, and I wonder what the thoughts were.
No, we didn't. And John, it's funny, the criticisms, there's two criticisms and critiques, not criticisms, they're not criticism. Everybody's got, you know, a point of view and they want to share. And I really do appreciate everything that I go back because, you know, we don't think about it when we're writing it. And one thing that we didn't spend a lot of time on was mortality. And the reason was because we were trying to make a case on fertility. We were really focused on that issue because we thought there was a lot of confusion on that question. And the cultural aspects around it were really, really interesting because there was a decision for somebody to make. And as we're saying, but this is the first time in human history where we decided to be fewer. We've actually decided to be fewer. It's because of choices that we're making. We thought that that was a really interesting narrative element of the book. If we're wrong, it's on the mortality side. If somebody finds a cure for cancer tomorrow, maybe we'll get to 11.2 billion. But it won't be 11.2 billion with the population structure like it is today. There'll be a lot more older people. Or if somebody finds a cure for heart disease or whatever. Longevity is just going to continue to expand. There's no best before date on human life. The estimates are that kids that are being born today will probably live to the age of 100. So if we're wrong, it's probably on that side of things, not on the fertility side. More questions? Sir?
Thank you very much for this interesting perspective as to delivery. I have two questions. Have you accounted for the undocumented birth rates? Some of the places you mentioned in India and Kenya, they are in the middle of nowhere in China, so there isn't a lot of documentation for birth. Some people don't have birth rates. Question number one. Number two is, and this is just, I would like to hear your opinion about it, is that there's a great scientific movement now in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and there's this notion is that a lot of the people, especially the middle-aged people, will be more relaxed in their job and their work because the machines and the algorithms will do their job. So guess what? People, when they are a bit more relaxed and have time to do, they might have an increase in I'd like to know your opinion.
Usually do better if you just turn the power off if you have brownouts, you tend to do really better in fertility sites. On the first question on documented births, what can I tell you? There probably is quite a few, but enough to tip the balance. I don't think so, or to change the trend. I don't think so. On the second thing, in terms of AI and the future of work, I think it's a really, really interesting question. So when I interviewed Wolfgang West, this was one of his big points. And he said, look, it's not as big a problem as we think, because in fact, people are living older and healthier. Why do we say that people should retire at the age of 65? Most people probably want to keep working in some capacity. So the way that we're going to be able to deal with this problem going forward and make it affordable, because the dependency ratios for the other people supporting older people are going to be out of this world, is if older people stay in the workforce for longer. And I think that's probably what you're going to see. In fact, it's what's happening in Canada now. This idea of aging in place. So this idea that people, older people sell their houses and move to seniors' residence and all that. Yeah, some do, but most don't. Most stay right in the family home. They might retrofit it. They might change the way that they live in their house, but they pretty much stay where they are. And they also continue to work. Maybe they don't work 5 days a week and they don't work 40 hours a week, but maybe they work 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And so we don't tend to, Ottawa's not funded that way because public service pensions and all the rest of it. You can probably retire at 65 and have a really fun life after that. But most people don't have that. If you go where I live in Toronto, they certainly don't. So they keep working. And that's what's probably going to happen in most places. One of my favorite stats, by the way, is in the percentage of people between the age of 20 and 35 that live with their parents. In the Greater Toronto area, in Canada overall, it's 35%. In the Greater Toronto area, it's 50. So yeah, a lot of things are changing. But we keep pretending that they're the same, and they're not. Just keep changing. Sir? I probably.
Have you looked at the relationship between these demographic projections and the International Panel on Climate Change's modeling?
Yeah.
And can you comment on the impact of these demographic things on climate change?
So first thing, climate change is real. The effect that human beings are having on the climate is real. There's no doubt about that. But if you believe those two things, and you change one of the denominator in the equation, which is the number of human beings, surely it's going to have some effect. So there has been, I've seen at least one study that shows that there's a couple of percentage decline in temperature as a result of the population not getting to 11.2 billion, so somewhere around the estimates that I'm talking about, somewhere between 8 and 9 billion, that there is an impact, a positive impact on the climate. But we're not really having that conversation right now.
Do you know what the model is that the IPCC uses?
No, I don't. But I'm sure that the population number that they have is 11.2 billion, because those guys are just down the hall. So they wouldn't have another one. But I think on this topic, I know the issue of climate is extremely important. People get quite passionate about it. And one of the criticisms that observations that people have made about the book is, population is going to decline, this is going to be good for the climate, so this is just giving fuel to the climate change deniers. No. Nobody's saying anything like that. But what we're saying is that if you're going to have a conversation about this, have a factual conversation. If you're losing 11.2 billion people in your model, that's not a fact. Okay. Yeah, Mark?
Sorry, can we go to the back first?
Oh, sorry, I can't see people, so somebody's going to have to throw something at my head. So I'm sorry, so yes?
In public policy circles,
Oh, you don't want to go there.
population aging occasionally gets serious consideration and discussion, but in my experience, the principal cause of population aging, which as you've explained, is fertility rates, is almost never discussed, which I've always found very strange.
Sounds like I should write a book about it,
Why are we so reluctant in this country to talk about fertility rates?
I think we take it for granted. I think, that there are things like population stuff, in business. So I work in the private sector, in business. We're always obsessed with the, quarterly financials and monthly financials. We're not looking further out. I think in politics and government, we're usually looking at electoral cycles or whatever. We're not really thinking that far out. The thing about demographics that's really interesting is that all of the decisions that matter about them have already been made for the most part. They were made by your parents. They've been made by you in terms of the number of kids that you want to have. They were made by generations previously about where they decided they wanted to live. Most of those decisions are made. You can see it coming from 1,000,000 miles away. It's like a glacier kind of creeping towards you. It's happening slower. The velocity of it isn't as quick, and but the impacts are more, in many ways, profound. But for some reason, we just don't pay attention to them. I'm not a demographer. I would never pretend to be a demographer, but I'm certainly comfortable with statistics. And the more I look at demographics, the more interested I am, and the more important I think they are. And fertility rates, if anybody knows how an equation works, one of the inputs is diminished, the output is going to be diminished. It's inevitable. So you think we should pay attention to it? But you're right, very few people do.
Daryl, I'm sorry, we're going to do 2 more questions and.
Can we make sure that one of them is this gentleman here?
Sure.
Oh, you know what? I could take a couple more. That's fine. She's got her hand up here, and absolutely, we're going to ask her too. Okay, sir, go ahead.
Thank you for a very eye-opening presentation.
Very kind, thank you.
I have a question about, part of your thesis is the central importance of cities.
Yes.
And do you think that with the development of the 5th and 6th and 7th generation of the internet, many of the advantages of a city can be disseminated all over the place? And will the attraction of the cities continue in the future at the rate that it has been in the past?
That's one of those questions that it's a really good question, and the answer is, I don't know. A lot of my answers to my question should be, I don't know. But I've been working in this business for about 30 years. And since the day I started, everybody's talked to me about telecommuting and remote working and all the rest of it. And it's never really happened. In spite of all the advantages that we have, people are still clustering more and more into fewer and fewer places. And it's happening worldwide. I keep hearing, and I just read a story the other day about how Atlantic Canada is becoming this big telecommuting zone. No, it's not. Atlantic Canada has a dire population problem. There are more people dying every day in Atlantic Canada than being born. It looks more like Japan than it does like Ontario. Surely you would think that people would go for cheaper real estate prices, wonderful standard of living, great affordability, wonderful communities, family life, and they're just not. They're just not. Maybe someday they will, and maybe that might be a bit of a solution. I know when I was in Brazil, they were talking to me in Sao Paulo about these new satellite cities that they're starting to come up because people don't want to live in downtown Sao Paulo anymore. So maybe we'll see some of that, but even that's not moving back to Amazonia. They're not moving out to the countryside. They're not moving back to a rural life. So yeah, maybe some people will do it, but it doesn't seem to be a trend right now. And it hasn't been for 40 years.
Thank you.
This lady over here had a question?
Sorry, this guy has a microphone, I'll bring it to you.
Okay. And we'll finish with her, and then I'll take whatever questions you want afterwards.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I'm sure it's enlightening for all of us. I was just wondering whether you had a chapter on the Muslim world. And I just relate that to your comment that you just mentioned quickly in passing about religion being the one factor that could really change the whole situation, the whole formula.
Yeah, so in the Muslim countries, they're experiencing the same trend. And in most countries that have Muslim diasporas, where people have moved there, the immigrant population is a good example, is Turks, for example, in Germany. The whole country birth practices, the fertility rates, tend to last about 1 generation. And then they tend to align with the majority population in the country that they move to. It's not, we have this feeling that there's these, much larger fertility rates among Muslims, and the answer is no, there really isn't, for maybe 1 generation. But even in places like, say, for example, Saudi Arabia, the birth rate is 2.5 or something like that. It's not extremely high. It's not 8. And then that's it. Okay.
Hi. I was wondering, has anyone had a chance to apply these demographic data to predict modeling future need for physical resources, whether you want to talk about metals or agricultural land or water, because decreasing population seems to suggest that the demand would decrease, but increasing urbanization kind of suggests the opposite.
See, no, I haven't seen much of it, if any of it, and the reason is because nobody's really challenged the denominator in the equation. This is the first time anybody's really written a significant book on this. There's been a couple of others, but really to say the denominator in that equation needs to be challenged. So we'll start there and then we'll go to the next part of what the effect is going to be on other things. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daryl, for a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the RCGS, we'd like to present you with just a small token of our appreciation for joining us tonight. This is the Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada. It's a 4-volume set. It's a bestseller, and I'd like to offer it to you as a token of our appreciation.
All you have to do to get this is you have to do a presentation like this.
But with charts and graphs?
Oh, I was going to do charts and graphs.
No.
So Daryl,